Mage Storytime, Episode 13. Are we the bad guys? This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone. Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods. Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain. Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range. Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits. Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter. And Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. We met again on a Wednesday afternoon. We had made technically sufficient offerings to the spirit of capitalism, and so we were promised protection from any technocratic assaults on our shop, as well as a potential ally if and when we decided to take the fight to the technocrats. Before we could do any fighting, however, it was decided that we should have as many connections to the traditions as possible, so that each of our party members would have potential allies to call upon. It helps to have friends when you're planning to take on an international conglomerate/conspiracy. With that in mind, we left to see if we could help Kitty find a spot in the Euthanatos. It was only about a 15-minute drive from the mall where we had our headquarters to the funeral parlor where the Voodoo gangstas had helpfully informed us that the local Euthanatos met. They had also given us a line on the dream speakers, but we didn't have any party members actively interested in trying to join that tradition at the moment, so we decided not to seek them out just yet. While we drove, the topic of our treatment of Marco came up, and what the line was between rehabilitation and slavery. From there, the conversation somehow devolved until we were arguing about where we would keep the orphans until we could develop a virtual ninja training program to start our assassin army. Suggestions were also fielded about possibly reinforcing their ranks with disaffected young people enticed by a life of cigarettes, skateboarding, and general radness. Or maybe just starting a school for special young people and training a team of them in using their magic powers. It was a good thing the car ride ended before we got further in our plots. When we arrived at the Euthanatos funeral parlor, we pressed a bell outside the locked door, and after a chime it was opened by a towering, gray-skinned man in a dark suit. He stared at us for a minute, then spoke in sepulchral tones. "You rang." We identified ourselves as the Iron Goldfish. We had called ahead and been invited as guests. He gave a deep, mournful groan. Follow me." We didn't feel like we had much choice. The huge man escorted us to the back of the funeral home and opened the door to a large meeting room where maybe 20 people mingled in small groups, some hovering around a table full of light snacks. Free snacks were always a welcome sight, and a couple of us immediately gravitated towards them. While Bard and Alwi focused on stuffing their faces, Tello started asking people about marauder activity and actually being productive. A young woman dressed in black clothes that contrasted with her pale skin bounced over to the rest of us and introduced herself as Dee Dee. "Welcome, welcome, we are so glad to have you here." She seemed like she meant it. She also seemed like the exact opposite of what we expected from a bunch of supposed death mages, although Handy thought she seemed familiar. When she met her later, Tello agreed. Kitty was quick to introduce himself, and she gave him a brief hug. He said that he was interested in joining, and asked what they normally got up to. "Oh, I'm sure you've heard all sorts of horrible rumors, but it's nothing like that. It's the same as most any tradition, or really any club or organization. Meetings are just kind of business meetings, state the budget, membership initiatives, things like that. Sometimes we help some needy people with end-of-life care, but that's kind of an ancillary, volunteer thing. We have a lot of resources, like a magical library and experts in pretty much every field, but most of that stuff's done independently. Honestly, the meetings can be a bit dull, but I think that's true of all of them." "Speaking of experts," Kitty said, "do you have anybody that deals with spirits? I heard of something called a psychopomp, and I think I want to know more about them, for personal reasons." "Spirits that guide the dead to their final resting place, like the Grim Reaper or Hermes or Thoth or the Valkyries. I'm the local spirit expert, and I know a whole bunch of them. At least well enough to call on. Do you know anything about Baron Samedi? Because I'm a friend of his and I'm trying to gain favor and maybe some power. Oh yeah, he's a blast. I summon him for all the parties. With that, Kitty was well and truly sold. It turns out he had to do a little more to join, however. Admittedly, every tradition had initiation rites and rituals that those of us who had already joined had undergone. Bard said it was pretty much like joining a fraternity, down to the massive consumption of liquor in some cases. The Euthanatos did things a little differently, though. To join their tradition, they said, Kitty would have to undergo a near-death experience. When Weeb offered to do it there and then, Dee Dee was a little taken aback. No, I can do it right here. I've got life magic, so I'll just make him nearly dead and then bring him back. No muss, no fuss. Kitty was on board, but the young woman seemed a little squeamish. That's really not necessary, but thank you for offering. It's not that we're not prepared to do it right now, it's just that it's usually a more ritualized affair, and it's kind of gross, and there's hemlock and a whole blend of herbs and spices and everything. Lots of traditional stuff, pomp and ceremony, you understand. Kitty was a little crestfallen, but said he understood. Handy, who would move over to the snacks by this point, joined Tello and a man in a cream-colored seersucker suit and bolo tie as they talked about the situation with magical forces in the local area. Tello pointed out that DFW seemed to have a lot of night folk and spirit activity. The Euthanatos had a theory to explain part of that. Texas is a mythical focal point. It's the center of the cowboy myth, which in terms of psychological impact could be America's chief ideological export. So for billions of people around the world, not to mention all the Texans, Texas is the most important place in the United States. Hell, the Spirit Plane's representation of the state could probably go toe-to-toe with Uncle Sam. I mean, there's countries in Europe where Texas is a synonym for crazy. We thought that sounded like a plausible explanation, but no one was sure why Dallas would have so much more pull than the other cities around Texas. I mean, Houston might be a muggy portal to hell. 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 95% humidity. No one should have to endure that. But Austin and San Antonio were nice, and we were sure that the Alamo was a touchstone of some sort. Then Handy remembered the TV show Dallas, and Walker, Texas Ranger. Suddenly it all made much more sense. It was around that time that the giant by the door pulled a bell cord, sounding like a massive gong, and several people started gathering in the center, while the rest made for the exits. The man in the seersucker suit excused himself and walked over to Dee Dee. He was a bit surprised when the rest of us followed, until Dee Dee told him that we had come together and introduced Kitty as an eager new recruit. Well, in that case, would he and maybe his friends like to join us? Ugh, why do you guys keep doing this? You're just living the stereotype. And I'm sure these nice people don't want to do anything violent. Weeb, who had drained the living energy from someone with a punch, giggled. That's not exactly fair, the man said. We find people who are about to bring horrible karma upon themselves and get them off the wheel of fate. We do it quick and clean before they can bring doom to themselves and pain and suffering to others. You kill them, Dee Dee responded flatly. Before they can kill anyone else. Our target tonight's going to shoot up his workplace in 2 days. We've seen it magically and confirmed it with mundane investigation. By killing him, we save a lot of lives. It's still murder. It's traditional. With that, Dee Dee stormed off in a huff, and the man turned to the rest of us with a questioning look. Kitty was a bit hesitant, but Weeb, Bard, and Always seemed on board with killing someone before he could kill other people. Handy objected, however, and suggested that maybe there was some other way of intervening. This started an impromptu brainstorming session, and several suggestions were made, ranging from the boring and mundane, call the police with an anonymous tip, to the brutal but efficient, cut the guy's arms off so he couldn't hold a gun. The Euthanatos Mage said it didn't work like that, because fate would ensure that the event occurred at one point or another, unless they intervened directly. At least, that was what their traditional practices and rites had shown. Tello and Handy were both disturbed by the cold logic at play, and as the group went into a huddle, they insisted that this wasn't how fate or predestination worked. Strong words were spoken about justice, saving lives, and the nature of morality. Tello pointed out the links we had went to save Marauder Marco, who had already killed people, and the links we went to save the vampires. Handy noted how quick we had been to kill the ghouls and technocracy agents, but conceded the point when it was pointed out that they had tried to kill us first. This all prompted Weeb to ask the question that every role player must eventually ask themselves. Wait, are we the bad guys? We decided that if we had anything to say about it, we weren't. We might play murder hobos on TV, but we weren't that in real life. Realizing that our refusal could put us in danger, Aoi popped his head up from the group huddle and asked slyly, So, hypothetically speaking, what's to keep us from betraying you guys or calling the cops? Totally hypothetically, of course. Well, you wouldn't be the first to think of it. That's why we have a network of spells laid on the place that prevent anyone from betraying knowledge about what goes on in meetings. It's pretty complex stuff, but we have good reason to have faith in it. But you're free to leave if you don't want to take part. You don't have to do this, and not everyone in the organization does. Besides, you're not going to kill anyone. I was just offering you the chance to ride along. We have specialists who take care of that as cleanly and bloodlessly as possible. I was just trying to be polite and include the new guy and his friends. We've asked, Wait, how often do you guys do this to mages? Never? You took way too long to answer that. No, I didn't. That did change things slightly, and ultimately Kitty decided to ride along just to see what kind of organization he was joining. Bard determined he didn't have the stomach to kill someone who wasn't actively trying to kill him, and besides said his gods would be mad at him. A lot of superheroes don't kill. Likewise, Handy didn't want to be involved, and Tello still doubted the veracity of the organization's predictive powers. Since we were splitting the party anyway, Aoi, Weeb, and Critical went along with Kitty to make sure nothing happened to him. Nobody tried anything, but it never pays to trust in the kindness of self-admittedly murderous strangers. So it was that 4 of our party joined the man in the seersucker suit and the giant in their hearse. Kitty rode in the back. The hearse led a small convoy on a drive through the suburban streets. After about 20 minutes of dead silence, the cream-colored man mutely pointing directions, the cars pulled up to a normal-looking house, and the giant got out of our car and a woman got out of another. Our party members had a good view as the giant knocked on the door, and when it opened, he reached out, swiftly wrapped a smooth cord over the man's head, and made a jerking motion. The man's body dropped to the floor, and the giant closed the door gently. The woman stepped up and did something to the doorbell camera. And that was it. They got back in the cars and returned to the funeral parlor. The whole thing, not including drive time, took less than a minute. Our party members left, a little disturbed but otherwise fine, with an appointment for Kitty to return a few weeks later to die a little. A few days later, we met up again to go and see the Fey Lord. We had received a call from Archie Leon, or Lord Archeon, telling us that he wanted to see us. Since it had been declared that Weeb, Alway, or Tello had to be present at the meeting to make sure we got some sort of payment, we all decided to meet up and go. We arrived at the psychiatric ward where the Fey Lord had been hiding from the vampires killing his people. Once again, he greeted us with a broad smile and a bow. Welcome, my friends. I have heard of your triumph. You managed to run off the Tremere vampires who had been killing my people. We were only a little surprised that he already knew what happened, but Tello rallied quickly. Yes, we had to kill a few of their people, but we got rid of them. Oh, so you did kill some of them, and then you decided to stop? Well, they were very powerful, so we decided it was safer to do it without a fight, she lied. But they're out of your territory. Yes, and still preying on my race in other realms, and they could come back at any time. Not that it's necessarily my immediate problem. Kitty jumped in. Technically, you didn't ask us to kill them, only to help you make the people of your kingdom safe, which we did. You're right, and you did indeed do that. But if you'll remember, you also didn't ask for payment. Fortunately for you, I'm in a generous mood. In the honor of your service to me, and in the spirit of your victory, I give you the choice of your reward. A pair of 7-league boots, a candle of lifetime warmth, a pot of endless meat, or the scrying mirror of Bath. Or if none of those suffice, I could offer you a boon in the memory of your service. We may all be a bit less sane than standard, but no one in our party was stupid. We all caught the "in memory of your service" part, and understood that he would take the opportunity to screw us over as hard as the technicalities of the agreement would allow. It would be a ticking time bomb. Based on that, it was also assumed that the treasures, a pile of fairly mundane-looking objects he had heaped on the table next to him, were all traps. We pored over them for a while, and ultimately thought that the scrying mirror was the most useful, or the least obviously trapped anyway. As it turns out, we were right to choose it. We found out later that all of the gifts were legitimate wonders, and were infamous in certain circles. The 7 league boots did let you go 3 miles with a single step, but your back leg stayed still while your front leg moved, and a fine red mist covered the intervening space. The candle of lifetime warmth was the origin of the old saying, "Give a man a fire, keep him warm for a day. Set a man on fire, keep him warm for a lifetime." The pot of endless meat only produced rabbit, and Tello, a naturalist in her free time, helpfully informed us that an all-rabbit diet led to death by malnutrition. Finally, the scrying mirror of Bath looked into people's bathroom mirrors. So yeah, we got the most useful and perviest item. And apparently the enmity of the Fae, which she wasn't being too subtle about. But we were able to escape the conversation peacefully, since we hadn't technically done anything wrong. We had left the hospital and were walking towards the parking lot. We were in the medical district of Dallas, walking along a road that ran between a canyon of clean, white towers, as the bright summer Texas sun beat down on us. Then the world went wobbly for a second, and the sun was soon choked with ash and smog as it shone feebly through the canyon of the massive gray walls of buildings. The place looked like it had recently undergone a bombardment, and there were medical staff and wounded people walking around everywhere. A lot of them hadn't been there a few moments before, although some had. We all started looking around until we spotted the giant, 2-headed eagle symbol stamped on all of the buildings. We looked around some more and noticed that our clothes had changed. We were all wearing robes and holding metal staffs, with weirdly shaped pistols hanging at our new belts. The strangest thing, however, was that we were all bald, and had metal devices affixed to the back of our heads. They ran around to our temples, and they had a top that came up to the peak of our skulls, and was covered with small crystals. Deathwatch and Wrath and Glory had both appeared in our gaming sessions before, so we all knew what this meant. "Oh, hell yes," said Weeb, looking around for a stylized eye. He was disappointed when he didn't find one. You may think this an odd response, given the old joke that fans of this universe don't actually want to live in it. But that attitude doesn't take into account psychic powers. You'd be surprised how often the ability to hurl magic fireballs changes the situation. The people on the street had changed too, although most didn't seem to register any difference. The costumes of the pedestrians were different, and everything had a lot more skulls on it. The trio of policemen who had been standing on one corner now sported hard black armor and mirror-visored helmets. We were taking in our new surroundings when the peace was shattered by a blood-curdling "Wah!" "Oh, fuck," said Bard, and this time we all agreed. People started scattering as a quartet of hulking figures emerged from the smog at the end of the side street. There was a flash of purple to the side for a brief second, but we later decided that had been an illusion. The policeman moved to intercept them, but one of the green brutes reached out with a ragged metal blade and removed all 3 of their heads with a single swipe. As civilians scattered in terror, the one glowing with green lightning spotted us, pointed, and let loose another "Wah!" The other 3 joined in and started to charge. Bard, deciding that he wanted precisely none of this, turned to run. He might have been thinking that this was clearly a bubble of warped reality powered by a marauder, or multiple marauders, and that he could find his way out of it. He might have been thinking that, but he wasn't. What he was thinking was that he didn't want to be horribly killed by a bunch of screaming greenskins. He stopped abruptly, and in the momentary silence we all heard the click of a gun cocking. We turned to look and saw Bard's avatar, the cooler Bard, which we had all seen before, except now he was wearing a black greatcoat, black hat, and bright red sash. He had a pistol pointed squarely at Bard's forehead. "Reinforcements are coming, soldier. You will hold the line." We looked around. Handy's classical Greek muse and Talos' alien-looking humanoid were both dressed like Bard's avatar, while the red-haired warrior maiden who guided Weeb was clad in sculpted power armor. All were similarly threatening their mage charges. 2 power-armored warriors, one in black with a skull helm and one with a lot of spikes, had replaced always angel and devil avatars. Each had a gun pointed at one of his temples. The halo that Critical had often seen behind his head in the mirror was now visible to everyone, except it was made of metal and had large spikes. Still, he could feel it pressing into his skull, pushing him forward. The only one who wasn't being threatened by some agent of the human empire was Kitty. His avatar normally manifested as a green-skinned shaman. Now it looked more like our fast-approaching attackers, except with a lot more skulls and feathers on it. It told him to crump those gits, and a green light flashed in his eyes. Prompted to courage by a lack of options, Bard turned to face the onrushing greenskins. Weeb chided him, telling him to buck up. "Come on, man, we're psychers. We can take him." So saying, he shouted something about doom and threw a blast of lightning at the brutes, channeling it through the staff. Fortunately, we all knew the lore of the universe and how magic worked there, so we were able to adapt almost immediately. Inspired by Weeb, Bard tried to use his powers to force the monsters to witness their pending doom. When he did, it manifested as a bolt of energy that flew from his skull. Satisfied with the result, Bard started launching mind blasts at the enemy. Weeb and Handy did the same with their lightning. Talo, who was least familiar with the universe, asked if she could open a rift and summon her spirit minions through. We informed her that those would be called demons, and asked that she choose something else, but we did thank her for asking first. So Tello twisted matter to change particles in the air into bursts of plasma, firing them at the oncoming hordelet from her staff. Alwi and Critical, who found their magic didn't lend itself readily to combat of this type, settled for pulling their sidearms and plugging away. Critical was able to alter probability slightly, which manifested as a floating mechanical skull, appearing and aiming a targeting laser at the enemy. Kitty, who had apparently gone slightly mad, just sat over on the side assembling a ramshackle pile of metal. We fired away at the green monsters, and were actually hitting our targets, blowing chunks out of their flesh and armor, but they didn't seem to care. Even for what we knew of the lore, this seemed excessive. That, or we weren't nearly as powerful as we thought. Regardless, they just kept coming, blasting away with their massive guns. Fortunately, they didn't actually seem to be aiming at any of us. Apparently, they just found the noise therapeutic. The green caster, who had remained toward the rear, was more intent on his attack, however. With a shout, he shot a bolt of green lightning at Tello. Weeb saw it coming, caught the bolt with his staff, and sent it back at its caster. It splashed against the green monster's skin, and he chuckled. "You's gutsy, but now I's a squig ya!" He launched a bolt at Weeb, who took the blast, but managed to shake off the impulse to turn spheroid and start biting people. He did, however, understand roughly how the effect had been accomplished, and yelled back, "No, I's a squig ya!" He threw a ball of energy at the green sorcerer, laughing like a madman, but the hulking figure likewise shook off the effect. "No, I's a squig ya!" Throw, shake off. "No, I's a squig ya!" Throw, shake off. "No!" They went on like that for literally the entire battle. Kitty, his eyes glowing green, kept mumbling to himself as he worked frantically, ramming pieces of metal together in a haphazard manner. He kept muttering to his avatar, which kept hollering at him. Finally, he stood back from what had, somehow, become a human-sized walker cast in the crude likeness of his avatar. With a burst of magical energy from Kitty, it activated, turned its massive mechanical head, and began firing at our attackers. Unfortunately, it was only shooting small-caliber bullets, but the visual effect was impressive, and even the charging monsters cheered. We were having little effect stopping the monsters from closing to melee, so Critical pulled his enchanted D20. He threw it on the ground where it transformed into a beaded prayer necklace with a strange mechanism at one end. He activated what he recognized as the force shield and threw it at the oncoming horde. It landed right in front of one, who failed to see it and smashed face first into the force field. Blood burst from his flattened face as he fell to the ground, but he picked himself back up again and resumed the charge. Right into the force field. Bard doubled over with laughter as the creature picked itself up and slammed into the force field over and over again, eventually knocking itself out. He was still laughing a second later when the greenskins closed to melee range and reminded us that, wizard or psyker, a human is still a very squishy creature, nowhere more so than in this setting. A ragged axe to the chest dropped the mage in one blow, and he fell to the ground, struggling to breathe and trying not to die as the creature raced towards his next victim. Handy raced forward and created a psychic shield, knocking the monsters back and keeping them away from his fallen comrade. Alwi, seeing one of his best friends fall, was filled with rage. He called upon his friends to lend their strength to him for a final destructive attack. Everyone left off their individual efforts, which had so far failed to do much damage, and lent their psychic/magical might to him, reinforcing his spell with their own power. He raised his staff and gathered a glowing ball of magical energy above him. He planned to throw it at them like some sort of bomb, empowered with spirit, and forces in matter and prime, magic. He raised the ball high, and even the rampaging monsters stopped, raising their faces in awe. With a mighty cry, he hurled it into the air, where it fizzled, sparked, and popped out of existence. He let out a pain cry of, "Are you kidding me? What the actual fuck?" and fell to his knees, clutching his head in disbelief, while everyone else returned to their blasting. It was too late for Aoi, though, as one of the greenskins planted his blade in Aoi's gut and backhanded him off his feet. As he stood over his victim, chuckling and moving to finish off the mage, the rest of us let loose a combined volley that stunned his attacker. He reeled and critical charged up, throwing his relatively minor frame at the creature's knees. He knocked it off balance, and the thing fell mouth first onto Critical's abandoned staff, impaling itself. But while the green sorcerer in the background laughed himself hoarse at the pathetic death of his comrade, the last fighter turned on the remaining mages as they all backed away, still blasting. Ignoring their attacks, he started to pick his next victim, when his head rocked back, struck by a beam of light that vaporized part of his skull. We heard a roar of, "For the Emperor! Charge!" from behind us, and a couple of squads of infantrymen in uniform charged around the corner. As several of them ran to render aid to our fallen comrades, the rest finished off the remaining greenskin and the sorcerer with concentrated volleys of fire. The sorcerer died screaming defiance, and as it did, reality restored itself to normal. We found ourselves back in Dallas, standing, or lying bleeding, in the medical district. Aoi and Bard lay on the concrete with large meat cleavers in them, while the bodies of beefy guys in leather with a lot of crude monster and demon skulls on lay nearby. We could see a group of the former soldiers a little ways away corralling another one of the leather-clad guys with purple paint on. Evidently, he had been sneaking up on us somehow. The really surprising thing was that the ones taking care of us were the Kevins, our name for the clone technocracy agents that had attacked us before. "Are you all right?" one of them asked. "Hold on and we'll get your people to a medical facility." "What?" was all the semi-conscious all we could say as the technocratic agent patched him up. "Look, we saw you guys throw yourself in the way of those lunatics, even though they were twice your size. You saved a lot of people. You may be reality deviants, but at the end of the day you still want reality to exist. We're not on the same side, but we're at least adjacent." "What?" "You were fighting monsters, and we've been trying to fight these monsters, so we decided to help you out." "What? The bad guys can be the good guys? What the hell?" The little angel on Alwy's shoulder, still bedecked in black power armor and skull helm, appeared where everyone could see him and said, "Yeah, there's some good in everyone. A basic lesson, but it's important to remember. Consider yourself schooled." And with that, everyone in the party could feel more enlightened, as if we'd just seen an especially hokey after-school special. We were considering the implications of what Alwy's avatar had said when everything started to shake. Or rather, some things started to shake. A quick glance through our magical senses told us that it was, in fact, us that was shaking, while the ground and surrounding buildings were stable. The clones were also shaking, but not quite as much as us, and so too were a few of the random bystanders. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The leader of the Kevins, or at least the one who had been talking to us, muttered, "Spirit quake. Sorry, but we've got to go," and quickly orders his men to regroup and fall back. And so we were left to gather up our injured and do some magical first aid, all while we wondered what the hell a spirit quake was. What the hell is a spirit quake? What effects will it have? And what is the deal with the technocracy? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.